Okay, everybody. Good evening to one and all. As we continue with our wonderful world of coronaviruses, we make it our way through. Hope everybody's staying healthy in this wonderful period. Okay, we'll start first of all with the Torah portion for the week, Parshat Bo El Paro, come to Pharaoh. Here at the beginning of this Torah portion, the Torah makes very clear that from now on, it is God who is hardening Pharaoh's heart. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his courtiers." Now we have a reason, in order that I may display these my signs among them, and that you may recount in the hearing of your sons and of your sons' sons how I made a mockery of the Egyptians and how I displayed my signs among them, in order that you may know that I am the Lord. The Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, without question, is one of the most important events in the Jewish history. Frequently, we make mention of it. Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, a memorial reminder of going out from Egypt, is in part of the liturgy, many, many different places. Excuse me. Okay, so the next order of business on the hit parade of plagues is the locust. And I'm just reading the notes here in this text. It says the locust swarm is one of the worst scourges. An area of 1 square kilometer can contain 50 million such insects in a single night. They can devour 100,000 tons of vegetation. All right. So they're not exactly very pleasant to have around. And so we have the plague of locusts. And once again, Pharaoh plays games and wants to say, get rid of them and I'll let you go. And then he forgets it and says, the heck with it. And then we're told we're going to, Pharaoh says to Moshe, I stand guilty for the Lord your God, for you, forgive my offense just this once, and plead with the Lord your God that he may remove this death from me. Okay. So Pharaoh makes the nice words, and the Lord caused a shift to a very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and hurled them into the Sea of Reeds. And not a single locust remained in all the territory of Egypt, but the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. Okay, so once again, Pharaoh wants to give in, as we said at the very beginning of the Parsha. God wants to make sure that all of the various elements of the struggle are brought forth, and so he's not going to let them go. And then we have the penultimate plague, the plague of darkness. I know what I wanted to say. The translation here mentions a sea of reeds. Now, the name of the sea, Yam Suf, which traditionally had been translated as the Red Sea, and it may very well refer to the northern reaches of the Red Sea. But Yam Suf really means sea of reeds. All right, so it's the marshlands, the upper portions of the inlet of the Red Sea that is probably being referred to here and will be referred to when Moses and Israel cross through the sea. That's going to again be the Sea of Reeds, Yam Suf. Right, so now the Torah goes on to say that the Lord said to Moses, hold out your arm toward the sky that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched. Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was, but all the Israelites enjoyed the light in their dwellings. All right, so we're told that this darkness is not just simply a darkness, it's a darkness that can be felt. And indeed, the Midrash, in expanding upon this, suggests it was so thick, so heavy, that no light could penetrate it. And the Egyptians had to sit in their seats. If you got up, you couldn't find your chair again. So they were stuck for 3 days in their seats. One of the questions, again, the Midrash often asks this kind of thing: why this particular plague? Why darkness? And we're going to read eventually how Israel leaves Egypt. And when they leave Egypt, it describes it being chamushim. Now, chamushim, obviously, in that real text there, it refers to having arms. They bore arms, weapons. However, chamush can also be related to the word chamesh. Chamush can mean a fifth, in which case 1/5 of Israel left Egypt. What happened to the other 4/5? They died during the plague of darkness. They were the ones who were not worthy of leaving. They were the ones who didn't have heart or whatever. And so the plague of darkness, and so the Egyptians wouldn't see that these Israelites were dying at that time. And that's, like I said, that's the Midrash. That's not found in the exact actual words of the Torah. Okay. And so once again, Pharaoh starts to give in. He says, no, forget it. In the beginning of chapter 11, the Lord said to Moses, I will bring one more plague upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. After that, he shall let you go from here. Indeed, when he lets you go, he will drive you out of here, one and all. Tell the people to borrow each man from his neighbor and each woman from hers, objects of silver and gold. The Lord disposed the Egyptians favorably toward the people. Moreover, Moses himself was much esteemed in the land of Egypt among Pharaoh's courtiers and among his people. So in back pay, the Israelites are told to borrow without any intent to repay it to make up for their wages, the years of bondage. Thus says the Lord, Moses said, thus says the Lord, toward midnight I will go forth among the Egyptians, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on this throne to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And there shall be a loud cry in all the land of Egypt, such as never been or will ever be again. Not a dog shall bark or snarl at any of the Israelites, at man or beast, in order that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. So God says to Moshe, this plague is only going to affect the Egyptians. They're going to be very clear that they're the only ones who will suffer from it. Even dogs won't bother barking at Israel. And then we get to chapter 12, which in some suggestions should be the beginning of the Torah, because it's the first of the real mitzvot towards Israel. God says to Moses and to Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month will be for you the first of the months, for the first months of the year. So we're given the establishment of the Jewish calendar, the lunar calendar at this time. It is marking the month of the Exodus from Egypt. Nisan is, of course, the month of the Passover. And so it has that connotation. It's the first of the months, a month of liberation, of freedom for the Jewish people. And so the rabbis may, not having to read anything into this, makes it very clear that this establishes the Jewish calendar for all time until today. Our calendar, the Jewish calendar, is still, as you know from the very early lessons that we've had, lunar calendar that is adjusted for the solar year. And indeed, we find in this paragraph, it says, speak to the whole community of Israel and tell them to take a lamb. This is going to be for the Passover sacrifice. It has to be without blemish, a yearling male, from sheep or goats. You have to watch over it until the 14th day of the month. And all the assembling congregation of Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the house in which they eat in. They shall eat the flesh that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in any way with water, but roasted, head, legs, and entrails over the fire. You shall not leave any of it over until morning. If any of it is left until morning, you shall burn it. All right, so we're told that this is the Passover sacrifice, is the origin of it. When the first time the blood of the lamb or goat that was slaughtered was put over the doorposts and the lintel of the houses. Most people and most Jewish commentaries assume that this was on the outside of the house. Right? And then you've seen the famous Cecil B. DeMille's ancient 10 Commandments. You'll see them painting it on the doorposts and the lintels of the house. One of the medieval commentaries, the Ibn Ezra, says no. It was on the inside of the house. The question is, what purpose was it to serve? Right? Now, if you put it outside, is it to tell the angel of death not to attack that house? Well, the angel of death can ascertain who is the firstborn of every Egyptian. Certainly the angel could ascertain this is a Jewish house or a non-Jewish house. Okay, so it's really not necessary for that. So who is the sign for? It's really a sign for the Jews themselves. All right? And the blood of the house where you are staying shall be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you so that my plague will destroy, no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So you can read it, as many do. It's a sign, as it were. God sees it. He passes over your house. And that's what Pesach, Passover, literally means pass over, to go over, skip over the houses of Israel. But it can also be the fact that you are telling yourself, by painting the blood on the doorposts, making the sacrifice of worshiping God, you are participating in that. When we come to the Passover Haggadah, and when we talk about the wicked son, we'll see how he fits into this story about the blood. Okay, but like I said, Ibn Ezra says they put it inside, and put inside that for the Israelites window. Right? And this day shall be for you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate as a festival to the Lord. Throughout the ages, you shall celebrate it as an institution for all time. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the very first day, you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day to the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. All right. So we have here the institution of Passover, Pesach Mitzrayim, the Passover of Egypt, and then Pesach L'Dorot, the Passover for the future generations, will be different in many aspects. Right? During the days of the temple, they indeed had the Passover sacrifice. Today we do not. And indeed in Ashkenazic circles, Jews of Europe were careful not to eat lamb or to have a roasted meat at the Seder table, so we don't want people to think we're having the Passover sacrifice. All right, so we read about what happens, and Israel is on its way out of Egypt at the end of the story. All right, we're ready for Parsha B'Shalach next week, which talks about the crossing of the sea. All righty. We're going to turn now to the Hebrew. Let me get that set up here. That's not where you want to be. There we go. I think did we do Dalet last time? I don't think we did. Okay.
I think we did do Dalet.
We did do Dalet. All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because we talked about the little curve on the end there. I'm sorry.
Right.
All right. So we go to the next letter, letter Vav. Now, this is can be confusing because this letter, the letter Vav, by itself, like this, it has a pronunciation of a V. Okay? And therefore, it will associate itself with any vowel that's there. So that if it's the first one, we'll read it, all right? That would be Va. And then again, Va, all right? Now, that's how we pronounce it today. However, a lot of scholars believe that during biblical times, it was actually pronounced as a W sound. So that David was pronounced in Hebrew of the biblical period, just like the Arabic wa is pronounced. So it would be Dawid, not David. Okay? So right now, we've also come across the vowel with like an olam here, right? You have a dot above it. When you have the dot above it, it's pronounced as O. Now, when it's standing by itself, we don't know. So right now, we're going to pronounce it as a V for all our examples until we get to the point where we'll talk a little more detail about it, line 5, okay? So everybody unmute yourselves, disunmute yourselves. Come on, guys. I don't want to see those lined microphones, red microphones with lines through them. I see some still red microphones with lines through them. Come on, people. All right, all right. You know, some people are still not doing it. All right, let's start anyway. Line number 1, okay? Number 1, we've got Va, and Va, they, ve, vi, vo, re. All right, so do, re, mi, right. Line number 2, Vav, vu, vo. All right, so how do we know that it's vo? Well, we've got the V sound here. The first letter is a V. You can't have 2 V's together. You've got an O on top of that. So that tells you that the second letter there is the vowels form of it. That's vo, okay? Sav, siva, hove. Okay, line number 3. Vikam, vivaten, vihadag, vihatur, va'ad. Line number 4. Rava, revach, roveach, vi'ilu. All right, line number 5. Vilachatz, vatiten, vehotzi, vilon. Okay, line 6. Viter, vechule, vatrani, vehahore. Okay, line 7. Vadaut, vador, ufrots. Okay, now, here's where we have to learn the word here, first word on that line is mitzvah. Okay, mitzvah meaning commandment. The plural of mitzvah is mitzvot. Now, modern Hebrew would often add an extra vav in it. You look, see down here in Israeli Hebrew, when they don't have the vowel signs, they would spell it this way, mitzvot. However, traditionally, it was only spelled this way. Now, how do I know that it's mitzvot and not mitzvot? Okay. All right. The shva here, the letter, that vowel, that pattern tells you that the tzadi, the second letter there, is silent. There's no vowel with it. So it's part of the first syllable, mitz. So it's mitz. The next letter has to be a consonant. So there you get mitzvot, because there's no other vowel associated with it. All right? The way they said the plural mitzvah, a minor reading problem, is written mitzvot based on the consonant vowel consonant pattern described earlier. The vowel vav must first be read as a consonant, and then the vowel cholam, the dot above it. Thus, mitzvot is if it were written mitzvot. Now, in a lot of modern forms of the writing, instead of the dot being right above the vav here, as it is here, it will be moved over a little bit so that you'd have it. That didn't work. Oh, well, forget it. So you'd have it on the side. Or let's look at here. With this mitzvot here, it's as if that second vav weren't there. The tav would be over a little closer. So it's one of those words, the easiest way to do it is to memorize it. Mitzvah, mitzvot. So it's vitzivanu, right? And then b'mitzvotav. Notice how he says how that sound, tav, the yud gets absorbed, as it were, into the vowel, tav. Mitzvah, the letter tzadi vav hey means command, order. Mitzvah is an order, a commandment. Vitzivanu is he commanded us. B'mitzvotav, in his commandments. So we now can read this bracha, which is for lighting Shabbat candles. So let's all read it together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Okay, so when you go to light your candles this Friday night, have this in front of you and practice. Some of you may have memorized it already, but now you can see what the Hebrew words look like that you've memorized. Lahadlik means to kindle, to set on fire. Daled Lamed Kuf has the meaning of fire, making something fire. And Delek is the name of a gasoline company in Israel. Ner really means a lamp. Today we usually translate it as a candle, but ner really is a lamp, because the ancient world they used oil lamps, a little clay pot made into a triangle shape with some oil and a wick. Shel means of, and Shabbat is the Sabbath. So we are going to stop the share here tonight with this. All right. So you just have that Vav paragraph, the Vav working. Spend some time on it this week, going over it to make sure that you have that adequately down. All right. Tonight, we're starting the second of the major divisions of the Tanakh. The first division is the Torah, 5 books of Moses. The second division of the Tanakh is in Hebrew Navi, or Neviim, which is Navi means a prophet. Neviim is the plural form of prophets, sometimes referred to as the prophets. And then the prophets, and again, are divided up into different books. You have the sheets that I sent out to everybody with the 24 divisions. We have what are referred to as Neviim Rishoneim, the former prophets, and the former prophets are really more historical works, in a historical in the sense of a kind of history. We'll come back to in a moment. So you have Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. That's the traditional Jewish biblical division. Joshua, as we'll look in a minute, takes over after the death of Moses. Then Samuel judges the period of time between the death of Joshua and eventually the coming to power of Samuel, and then the institution of kingship in Israel. And then you have the 2 books of Kings, which are a history of the kings of Judah, originally Judah and Israel together in the United Kingdom of David. And then after his grandson Rehoboam comes to power, then Rehoboam breaks up the kingdom into the northern tribes and the southern tribes, and they remain separate for the most part until the destruction of the northern kingdom in 722 before the Common Era, and then finally the destruction of Judah under the Babylonians with the burning of the temple in 586 BCE. Right? Now, when I say history, we're talking about, first of all, ancient history was not always the history as we think it should be. Right? You know, we kind of have this vision that history is supposed to be sort of like an objective record of events. But we know, of course, even today that there's no such thing as a totally objective record of events. But it's supposed to be pretty much, as it were, a good newspaper reporter telling you what happened. Well, when you look at ancient histories in general, we see that sometimes they're not so careful about details in that way. We read about speeches that there's no way that the person who wrote the history could really know what that speech was. They weren't there to hear it. Then clearly the speech was written by the historian, as he or she, for most, certainly almost always he, thought that character would have said, would have addressed people. Okay? So you take that with a very big grain of salt. Furthermore, when we look at the biblical histories, while there may be clearly historical details in them, the major purpose of the former prophets through the 2 books of Kings is really to teach a lesson. They are not really meant to be objective, verifiable history. And that can resolve some of the issues we have, as we'll see. The book of Joshua doesn't really seem to have a completely identical understanding of the conquest of the land of Canaan. In Joshua, it sounds like it's all one unified invasion of Canaan with the destruction of everybody there. While in the book of Judges, it seems like it's more of a tribal conquest. Each tribe has to conquer its individual territory. And it's far from a total conquest, with many local inhabitants remaining behind and not being expelled or not being forcibly converted or whatever. Joshua is a picture of a unified force. Joshua is the leader of all of Israel. Judges has local chieftains, local tribal heads, who come to the fore when needed. Samuel, as we'll see in a minute, and we get to Samuel in a bit, Samuel begins with a discussion of really a continuation of the same kind of basically a local rulership under Eli, the high Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and then under Shmuel, Samuel. And then there's a request from the Israelites to appoint a king to replace Samuel. And we have a description of that and how Samuel's not exactly very pleased with that, but it seems like it was an absolute political necessity to deal with the threat of the Philistines. So we will look at some of that. I realized after I had done this, okay, let's see. I have a better way of doing this a little bit later, but I wrote this, so I might as well start with this. Okay, this is the opening of Joshua. And Joshua opens with a bridge. We read in the last chapter of Deuteronomy, the death of Moses. And so Joshua takes over at that time. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, not a nun, but Nun, Moses attended. All right, so Joshua attended Moses. We read about that in the Torah. And he takes his place. And my servant Moses is dead. Prepare to cross the Jordan together with all this people in the land that I'm giving to the Israelites. Every spot on which your foot treads, I give to you as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the wilderness and the Lebanon to the great river, the river Euphrates on the east, the Hittite country, and up to the Mediterranean Sea on the west. Now, throughout the Tanakh, throughout the Bible, we have different boundaries for the land of Israel. Some wider, some smaller. This is one of the more expansive versions of it. The Euphrates rivers is all the way into Iraq. So from western Iraq, all the way to the Mediterranean Sea by Lebanon. And then down south, it doesn't really say exactly where that ends at the southern division. But the Negev was not highly occupied by ancient Israel. Right? Now, no one will be able to resist you as long as you live. As I with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and resolute, for you shall apportion to this people the land that I swore to their fathers to assign them. But you must be very strong and resolute to observe faithfully all the teachings of my servant Moses enjoined upon you. Do not deviate from it to the right or the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Let not this book of the teaching cease from your lips, but recite it day and night, so that you may observe faithfully all that is written in it. Only then will you prosper in your undertakings. Only then will you be successful. I charge you, be strong and resolute. Do not be terrified or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So Joshua is promised by God that he will be with them, that they will be able to conquer. Nobody will be able to stand against them. But, as we shall see shortly, that promise is based upon whether or not the Israelites faithfully observe God's law. And one of the things also that Joshua makes clear, do not deviate from it to the right or left, from the Torah. When we talk about prophets, we often think of people who foretell the future. Some, especially in Christian circles, want to suggest that they frowned upon some of the biblical teachings of the Torah. That is not how the Bible itself describes it. The prophets come not to give new teachings, not to come up with new laws, but to reinforce that there is a certain relationship with God. It's a covenantal relationship. God promises Israel certain things, but that is contingent upon Israel obeying the Torah in all its manifestations. And while the prophets are sometimes are shown to condemn the sacrificial system, it's not a condemnation of the system per se. It's a condemnation of thinking that if you do the rituals, but you don't follow what God wants, if you don't act in a moral manner, if you don't take care of those who need taken care of, well, in that case, you are violating, and you're not really going to profit from the sacrifices. The sacrifices are no good when you don't observe everything that you're supposed to observe. It's not ritualism for itself. One of the most important ideas that the true religious individual is not a person who is very, very careful to make sure they keep kosher, but they keep kosher in their life, how they treat others. So do not deviate from the right or the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Some scholars talk about what was known as the Deuteronomistic history. The Deuteronomistic history is sometimes said to be starting with the book of Deuteronomy and working its way all the way through Kings as kind of an overarching philosophy of history. You do right, you will be rewarded. You do wrong, you will be punished. And certainly there are a lot of elements of that in these teachings of the Bible, but it's more than simply that. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire book of Joshua. I'm going to hit a couple of important points. The Israelites, after they cross over the Jordan River, after they have a ritual at Gilgal and they have a circumcision and reestablish a covenant with God, the first city they're going up against is Jericho. And the book of Joshua describes it as really, truly a divine victory. For they're told to circle the city once a day, and then the seventh day they circle it 7 times, and they blow the shofar, and the walls come tumbling down. Thus, the victory is really God's victory, not that of the Israelites per se. But in that, we're told in Joshua 6:17, the city and everything in it are to be prescribed for the Lord. Now, everything is in the city is not to be taken by individuals. It belongs to the sanctuary. Only Rachav, the harlot, is to be spared, and all who were with her in the house, because she hid the messengers we sent. If you don't know the story, look it up about how the spies come and Rachav hides them. She is described in Hebrew as a zonah. Now, the word zonah does mean a harlot, prostitute. Some people want to say it means an innkeeper. Well, the inns and houses of ill repute are pretty much generally the same thing in that period of time. You need a roof over your head, you got a roof over your head. If a man was interested in a partner for the night, he could get a partner for the night. All of those were the reality of the ancient world. Okay. But Rachav, by saving the spies, and they promised to spare her and her family. Okay. So it says, it continues, but you must be aware of that which is prescribed, or else you will be prescribed. If you take anything from that which is prescribed, you will cause the camp of Israel to be prescribed. You will bring calamity upon it. All the silver and gold and objects of copper and iron are consecrated to the Lord. They must go to the treasury of the Lord. We have in this message that each individual is part of the whole. You're not separate and distinct. What one person does affects everybody else. It's sort of like the lifeboat, that a guy is drilling a hole in the lifeboat and he says, "What are you worried about? It's just under my seat." Well, if you drill a hole in the lifeboat, I don't care where it is, it's going to affect everybody. So later on, the rabbis have the expression, all of Israel are responsible one for another. You cannot separate yourself. And so really one of the major issues between traditional Jewish vision of the world and what is held up in the modern world is the role of the individual. How much is a person totally individual, free, and how much are they part and parcel of the people of Israel? The traditional understanding is that while we may all have free will, and obviously we can do as we please, we are part of the people of Israel, and we can never separate ourselves from that. And whatever we do has effect upon our fellow Jew. And historically, that has been true. Even till today, when somebody is Jewish and they do something wrong, many people out there in the world are quick to use the brush of their misbehavior to paint every Jew. If there's somebody who cheats in business, every Jew is a cheat. If they're fast and loose with morals, every Jew is fast and loose with morals. So certainly that is a reality of life. If you're part of a group, you can never totally escape from that group, and whatever you do will cast a reflection in that group. So here we're told in chapter 6 that everything in the city is cherem. It's got to go to the temple or the tabernacle at that point in time, treasury of the Lord. The Israelites, however, in the beginning of chapter 7, violated the prescription. Now notice what it says, the Israelites. It's plural, it's everybody. Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerach of the tribe of Judah, took of that which was prescribed, and the Lord was incensed with the Israelites. So one person, Achan, did what he shouldn't do, but the biblical account is that God is upset with all of Israel. Because, as it said before, everything is prescribed, except if you take anything which is prescribed, you cause the camp of Israel to be prescribed. So Achan does this, and they find out they try to attack a town, and they get easily defeated, and they don't know what's happened, and so they find out, and they eventually discover who it is by casting lots, that it was Achan who sinned. And so the God says later on in the account of Joshua, Israel has sinned. They have broken the covenant by which I bound them. They have taken of the prescribed and put it in their vessels. They have stolen. They have broken faith. Therefore, the Israelites will not be able to hold their ground against their enemies. They'll have to turn tail before the enemies, for they have become prescribed. I will not be with you anymore unless you root out from among you what is prescribed. So the answer is, there's a way out of this quandary, and that is to punish the guilty person, which does indeed happen. And now the rest of the book of Joshua recounts various battles, various campaigns, again, seemingly to be a unified whole. Even we're told in Deuteronomy, actually goes back to Numbers, that the tribes of Reuven, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh settle on the east side of the Jordan River, not on the west side. But they promised Moses that they will help conquer the land on behalf of all the Jewish people. Indeed, Joshua records that that's what they did. And then the land is divided up amongst the various tribes. And when you're finished with that, you would assume from what was described that the war of conquest was over. But we read in the next book of the Bible, in the book of Judges. Now the word is usually translated judges. The word shofet normally means a judge. And the shoftim, or shoftim is the name of the book because the various leaders are called shoftim, judges throughout the book. However, they are really more like chieftains, tribal chieftains. And indeed, that's how the new JPS translation translates them as chieftains, not as judges. So we're told after the death of Joshua, the Israelites inquired of the Lord, which of us shall be the first to go up against the Canaanites and attack them? Well, what do you need to be the first to go against the Canaanites if you've already conquered the land? So as we see when it comes with the description of creation, right? We have the first chapter of Genesis, which describes creation, day 1, day 2, day 3, through 6 days of creation, then the Sabbath. And it seems to be order and everything's all done. But then we read chapter 2 after the story of the Sabbath, how it doesn't seem to be there yet. God hasn't caused it to rain. There's no person to take care of the crops. Grasses haven't grown yet. A human being hasn't been created yet. And the rabbis explained this by saying what chapter 2 of Genesis is a filling out of what was said generally in the first chapter of Genesis. It gives you the details. That's how the rabbis dealt with this seeming contradiction. So you can either assume, as they did, that this just doesn't mean after Joshua, that's when they started the battle for conquest, but that either they had to have some Canaanites who were left that they had to deal with, which is possible, or it's kind of reviewing, even though it says after the death of Joshua, you should know that the Israelites had started off this way. But again, even so, it seems to be tribal, not a unified front. So we read, the Lord replied, let the tribe of Judah go up. I now deliver the land into their hands. Judah then said to their brother tribes, Simeon, come with us to our allotted territory and let us attack the Canaanites, and then we'll go with you to your allotted territory. So it begins with Shimon and Yehuda beginning the conquest, and the tribe of Shimon really does eventually disappear into the tribe of Judah later in history. And then it describes some of their exploits. But then in verse 22, the house of Joseph, for their part, advanced against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. So we're told house of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. And it gives a description of what they do. And then verse 27, we have more information. Manasseh did not dispossess the inhabitants of Beit Shan and its dependencies, or of Tanakh and its dependencies, or the inhabitants of Dor and its dependencies, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its dependencies, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its dependencies. You know, we have these cities or city-states, and around the cities are small villages like modern-day suburbs of these cities. That's these dependencies. So we're told that unlike what seems to be the description of Joshua, the conquest is not total. There are many Canaanites that are left around. The Canaanites persisted in dwelling in this region. And when Israel gained the upper hand, they subjected the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not dispossess them. Nor did Ephraim dispossess the Canaanites who inhabited Gezer. So the Canaanites dwelt in their midst at Gezer. All right, so we see this is not a total conquest. The archaeologists seem to suggest that it was a piecemeal conquest of the land, and that the description of Joshua is a idealization of the reality that's more reflected in the book of Judges, where it was a piecemeal, and indeed, as is described in some places here and in Judges, In Joshua, the Israelites ended up mostly settling on the high mountains and the high hill area, which was not as fruitful because the people who lived in the plains, the lower areas, were too strong for them. And some of the earliest Israelite settlements that archaeologists have found have been in the less nice sections of the land of Israel. So now we're still here, but now in chapter 2, we're given kind of an overall description. It says, when Joshua dismissed the people, the Israelites went to their allotted territories and took possession of the land. Well, that summarizes what we had in chapter 1, but it's more based upon the sounding of what we had in the book of Joshua, because it doesn't say they went to capture, they went to their allotted territories, although took possession can either mean they settled it there at that point after everything was done, or they had to actually conquer it. The people served the Lord during the lifetime of Joshua and the lifetime of the older people who lived on after Joshua, who had witnessed all the marvelous deeds the Lord had wrought for Israel. Okay, so when Joshua was around, when those who were left over from the Exodus from Egypt, the younger generation who had been in the desert and knew what God had done for them, everybody was grateful to God and they followed his way. But another generation rose after them, which had not experienced the deliverance of the Lord or the deeds that he had wrought for Israel. And the Israelites did what was offensive to the Lord. They worshiped the Baalim. Baalim are local Canaanite deities, and forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They followed other gods from among the gods of the peoples around them and bowed down to them. They provoked the Lord. So as Deuteronomy makes very clear that you have to watch out that the local inhabitants, if you don't expel them, they will mislead you into worshiping their gods, and indeed that is what happens. And we know, again, archaeologists have found various idols, fertility idols and things like that in what are clearly Israelite communities of that era in history. So what would happen? Right? So a little later on, it says, when the Lord raised up chieftains for them, shoftim, judges, the Lord would be with the chieftain and would save them from their enemies during the chieftain's lifetime. For the Lord would be moved to pity by their moanings because of those who oppress and crush them. But when the chieftain died, they would act again basely. Right? And we have that several times. We have this formula. So that in 3:11, when Othniel the Kenizzite died, the Israelites again did what was offensive to the Lord. And because they did what was offensive to the Lord let King Eglon of Moab prevail over Israel. And a few lines later, then the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and the Lord raised a champion for them, the Benjaminite Ehud, son of Gerah. And so he kills Ehud kills the local king, Eglon, and saves the day. He rules over them for a while, but then chapter 4:1, the Israelites again did what is offensive to the Lord, Ehud now being dead, and the Lord surrendered them to King Avina Canaan, who reigned in Chatzor. So we have a clear pattern in Judges, which is what the Deuteronomy is referred to as a Deuteronomistic theory of history. Israel sins, God hands them over to punishment to some foreign power. That power rules over them. Israel cries out to God, asks for forgiveness. God sends a hero. The hero saves the day. Israel is freed. And then everything goes back again to the way it was before. This kind of circle of history. You have salvation, peace, you have sin, you have bondage, and then you have a salvation again. Around and around it goes, and where it stops, nobody knows. Okay. Now, there's some wonderful stories in the book of Judges. Some you may be familiar with, some you may not. we just left off with the introduction to the story of Devorah. Devorah is one of the few identified women leaders in Israel. She was a shofet, a chieftain, judged the people, Tamar Devorah. And we have her appointing Barak to go to war against their enemies. And Barak says to Devorah, I won't go unless you go with us. And Devorah enigmatically says to him, well, if that's going to be, then you won't get credit. We credited to a woman. So when you read it, you think, Devorah is going to get credit for the victory. But no, what we read about at the end of the battles is that a woman, Yael, kills Sisera. Sisera is the leader of the Canaanite armies, and she ends up killing him. And so, in fact, she gets really the credit for the ultimate victory, not Devorah. Now, I just want to see if I can do this now correctly. Where is it? Okay. All right. All right. Okay, sorry about that. Now I got it back together. I want to share the screen. There we go. Okay, this is the JPS translation. We read about the victory of Devorah in chapter 4. And then in 5, we have a victory song. Now, one of the things that we see in the Bible in a couple of places is that you have a prose account and you have a poetic account of the same episode. We have that in the Song of the Sea, and we have that here as Shirat Devorah, the Song of Devorah, of Deborah. As a matter of fact, on Shabbat, in a couple of weeks, Parsha B'Shalach, which when we read the Song of the Sea, the Haftarah, the selection from the prophetic books, is the story of Devorah. So, according to at least some authorities, the prose account is later than the poetic account. In the ancient world, people didn't have lots of books, things are generally memorized, and therefore poetry, songs were the way in which things were mostly handled and able to memorize them in verse. I hope the screen big enough for everybody. Let's see. All right, get a little bigger. Okay, so this is the Song of Devorah. I just want to read part of it because I love the last part that we have there. So this is, Malaks go untrimmed in Israel when people dedicate themselves, bless the Lord, hero kings, give hero potentates. I will sing to the Lord, will hymn the Lord, the God of Israel. And it talks about how in the days of Shamgar, son of in the days of Yael, caravans ceased and wayfarers went by roundabout paths. Deliverance ceased in Israel. To you arose, O Devorah, arose, O mother in Israel. When they chose, so you have this issue here that there's danger. Something's going on, and Devorah comes along to save the day. And why was that necessary? When they chose new gods. Was there a fighter then in the gates? No shield or spear was seen among the 40,000 in Israel, right? So they needed the help of salvation from God. All right. Then we have the song goes here and then talks about some of the people who were involved, the victories. We're not going to go through all of that. All right. So we have here an allusion to almost a mythological aspect of the war. The stars fought from heaven, from their courses, they fought against Sisera. Now you can read that as merely a poetic saying, you know, the stars are in our favor, as it were. The Midrash treats it literally to suggest that there's this aspect of the divine nature from God taking part in the battle. And the Kishon, you know, in Israel, you have what are called wadi or vadi. These are riverbeds that during the dry seasons are dry, summer, but in the winter you'll get rains and they can become raging torrents. So the raging torrent, the torrent Kishon, did battle. All right. So now, curse Meroz, said the angel of the Lord, bitterly curse his inhabitants because they came not to the aid of the Lord, to the aid of the Lord among the warriors. All right, so Meroz didn't join in the fight against Sisera. Then we read what we don't really, is spelled out a little differently from what we have in the prose account. Most blessed of women be Yael, wife of Hever the Kenite. Most blessed of women in tents. So the Kenites were nomads, lived in tents. She is being blessed here. Sisera, we're told in the prose account, when the battle goes against him, he flees from his chariot on foot, and she goes to their camp and asks to be hidden and asks for some water to drink and what have you, and to be hidden. So he says in the poem, he asked for water, she offered milk. You know, milk is a little heavier, makes you sleepier. In a princely bowl, she brought him curds. Her left hand reached for the tent pin, her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera, crushed his head, smashed and pierced his temple. In the prose account, he's asleep and she takes a tent peg and a hammer and nails it through his head. A little bloodthirsty kind of thing there. Nothing worse than Game of Thrones, all right? So kills him. At her feet he sank, lay outstretched. At her feet he sank, lay still. Where he sank, there he lay destroyed. All right, so then we're told about the death of Sisera. Again, in the prose account, we have a little bit more about that, how she shows off the body to the Israelites. But then we have a very powerful imagery at the very end of the song. Through the window peered Sisera's mother. So we move to the city of Sisera. And we have this picture of his mother standing by a window that's covered with a lattice. You know, so she looked out, and behind the lattice she whined, "Why is this chariot so long in coming? So why so late the clatter of his wheels?" Okay, he should have won. You know, they beat these Israelites. They have these iron chariots. These uncouth Israelites have nothing to compare to them. So he should have been here already. The wisest of her ladies give answer. She too replies to herself, he's late because he must be dividing the spoil they found. You know, they have a victory. And, you know, when you have a war, those days people brought a lot of stuff with them during the battles. And so the losers often not only lost their lives, but they lost a lot of property. So what they would find, whether they spoil they have, a damsel or two for each man, a spoil of dyed cloths for Sisera, a spoil of embroidery cloths, a couple of embroidery cloths around every neck is spoil. Okay, so they spend their time gathering up the women that were along with the Israelites and their clothing and all the other things. Little does she realize he's late because he's not coming back. He's been slain, end of the story. All right. And so may all your enemies perish, O Lord, but may his friends be as the sun rising in might. And the land was tranquil for 40 years. So once again, we're told at the end of the story of Devorah, 40 years of tranquility. And the number 40, I've mentioned it before, 20 and 40 mean long periods of time. Whether or not they should be taken literally is a good kasha, a good question. And we have a number of different stories to be found in Judges. The one that is one of the strangest ones, let's see. That's not what I want. All right. This describes a civil war that takes place in chapter 19. I skipped it. All right. So in the beginning of chapter 13, we have the story of Samson, the Jewish version of Hercules. Israelites again did what was offensive to the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. The Philistines enter into history around the same time of the Israelite conquest, at least a part of Canaan. It's not clear where they come from. It's surmised that they were related to the Greeks, Greek civilization. They settled along the coast in Ashdod and Ashkelon and Gaza, and they were a thorn in the side of Israel until the time of King David. Indeed, part of the rationale for the founding of the kingdom was that they needed a unified leadership in order to defeat the Philistines. So we're told this story. There's a man from Zorach, the stock of Dan, whose name was Manoach. His wife is barren. We've come across this motif many a time, born no children. The angel of the Lord appears to the woman and said to her, "You are barren, I have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son." All right, so this angel comes to her and tells her, "You're going to have a child." So now, but it goes on. "Now be careful not to drink wine or other intoxicant or to eat anything unclean. For you're going to conceive and bear a son. Let no razor touch his head, for the boy is to be a Nazarite to God from the womb on. He shall be the first to deliver Israel from the Philistines." So he's going to be the one who first delivers Israel from Philistines, which tells you there are going to be others as well, which means he's not going to be totally successful. So she goes and tells her husband, but what does she say? She said, "The man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God, very frightened." Right? But to her, he's a man. I didn't ask where he's from, nor did he tell me his name. And then she tells what the story's about. And God, and then Manoah pleased the Lord. My Lord, let the man of God you send come to us again. Let him instruct us what we're supposed to do. So again, we find that the man visits her in the field. And Manoah, and so she runs to her husband, and Manoah follows his wife. He came to the man and asked him, "Are you the one who spoke to my wife?" He says, "Yes." Then he says, "May your words come true. What rules shall be observed for the boy?" As if he didn't know already. He says, "The woman must abstain from all things against which I warned her." Not him, but she. "She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, or drink wine or other intoxicant, or eat anything unclean. She must observe all that I commanded her." Right? So he is to be a Nazir. Now, the Nazirite ritual is one that the rabbis at least understood normally to be a 30-day ritual. You took the oath of a Nazir for 30 days. If you just said, "I'm going to be a Nazir," 30 days was the normative time unless you added time to it. But this is a lifetime. So Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "Let us detain you and prepare a kid for you." But the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "If you detain me, I shall not eat your food. And if you present a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord." For Manoah did not know that he was an angel of the Lord. So once again, I wanted to read this so you understand. It's not, throughout the Bible, we have these messengers of God who are called angels, but there's no way that the people who are dealing with them identify them as being anything other than human beings. They are agents of God. All right, so, and then we're told about the birth of a son. She named him Samson, Shimshon. The boy grew up, and the Lord blessed him. The Spirit of the Lord first moved him in the encampment of Dan between Zorach and Eshtaol. And the first thing we've told about the story of Samson is already telling you that this is not the normative heroic story. Once Samson went down to Timnah, and while in Timnah, he noticed a girl among the Philistine women. On his return, he told his father and mother, I noticed one of the Philistine women in Timnah. Please get her for me as a wife. She's a nice looking girl, and he wants her for a wife. And his parents say, don't you have a nice Jewish kid around town, a nice Jewish girl here that we can set you up with? And he says, I want her. All right. But the author of Judges says that this was really God's doing. His father and mother did not realize that this was the Lord's doing. He was seeking a pretext against the Philistines, for the Philistines were ruling over Israel at that time. So he has these adventures. He goes down, he gets married to her. He has a riddle game with the local Philistines, and they're about going to lose the contest. So they threaten his wife, and she gets him to tell him the answer, and tells the answer, and all kinds of nasty things come as a result of that. We know the story of Delilah. Later on, he again falls for another Philistine girl, and when everything comes to that story is all over and done with, he is eventually says that his strength lies in his hair. It's not really his hair, but it's in the Nazirite vow. And when his head is shaved and the hair removed, it's not so much that there was magic in the hair. What it really was is it was a symbol, a sign. And by not observing that, he loses his strength according to the biblical story. When his hair grows back, he has an opportunity, and he destroys the Philistines in the temple of Dagon and dies at the same time. So when we look through the book of Judges, we find all kinds of characters in it, men and women, some of less than honorable intentions, some of them very honorable people, some of them mostly just military people, others have broader desires, and one is a carnival strongman, Shimshon. Now, by the way, we don't know who the authors of these books are. Rabbinic tradition is that Samuel authored Judges and perhaps Joshua. Joshua may have been part of himself. And we really don't know. And that's where I was talking about this Deuteronomistic history. There's some who suggest that there was a school of historians at some period in time who were responsible for collecting these stories and editing them into the books that we have today. Now, the book of Samuel opens with the story of Shmuel, actually the birth of Shmuel. I mentioned before, the first and second Samuel is called first and second only because it was a very large book and it's divided into two scrolls. It's similarly with the book of Kings, it's divided into two scrolls, but otherwise there's no reason for that division. All right, so we're told about this man, Elkanah, the son of Yeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tola, son of Zuf, an Ephraimite. He has two wives, one named Chana and the other Penina. Penina had children, but Chana was childless. Once again, we have this motif. Frequently, the heroic figure comes from a woman who had difficulty giving birth. And so we're told that Elkanah would go down to Shiloh, which where the God's sanctuary was at that time, and offer sacrifices. And year after year they would do that, and then she would be, Chana would went up to the house of the Lord. The other would taunt her so that she wept and would not eat. Her sister wife, Penina's the other wife of her husband. She used to tease her because she had no children. Well, Penina was obviously had children. And so she wouldn't eat. And her husband Elkanah said to her, Hannah, why are you crying? Why aren't you eating? Why are you so sad? Am I not more devoted to you than 10 sons? And typical deaf husband who doesn't realize has nothing to do with him, her desire for a son. Right? So after they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now the priest Eli was sitting on his seat near the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. In her wretchedness, she prayed to the Lord, weeping all the while. And she made this vow: O Lord of hosts, if you will look upon the suffering of your maidservant and remember me and not forget your maidservant, if you will grant your maidservant a male child, I will dedicate him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor shall ever touch his head. Again, this Nazirite aspect of the vow, she prays. And she kept praying before the Lord. Eli watched her mouth. Now Hannah was praying in her heart only. Only her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard. The rabbis in the Talmud use this story of Hannah as the primary description of how prayer should be. You should say it, your lips should move, only your own ears could hear it, but not somebody else. And so Eli thought she was drunk. Says, "How long will you make a drunken spectacle yourself? Sober up." Hannah replied, "Oh no, my lord, I'm a very unhappy woman. I've drunk no wine or the strong drink, but I've come to pour out my heart to God." So Eli says, "Good luck for you. You go in peace. May God grant you your wish." And sure enough, she has a child. And she promised God that when he grew of age, she would bring him back to Shiloh. And indeed, that's what happens. And he says in Shiloh, and again, after we have this prose account, we have this poetic account of her prayer. So as soon as Shmuel is brought into the scene, we're told, by the way, the rabbis say that God never inflicts any kind of punishment or any suffering on Israel unless he has the antidote already. So Samuel is going to be the antidote, and the punishment is, verse 12 here, now Eli's sons are scoundrels. They paid no heed to the Lord. So the high priest, the priest Eli, his sons, were not good guys. They didn't deal with the people properly. And so Shmuel eventually is going to succeed them. And we're going to basically end this with this account right now. We're told this, the life of Shmuel. Then we're told how Israel wants a king. They get him to appoint a king. Shmuel says that, you know, the king has got good things, but there are going to be lots of bad things that come from it. The people nonetheless want a king. And so Saul becomes the first king, and then later on, Saul doesn't follow all the God's commands, and David is made to be this future king, and all the story of David. There's a lot here. We're not going to go over these stories. I hope you will take a chance to read some of them in the readings I gave you. But we're going to really finish with that for tonight. Okay. So anyway, we're going to finish up here since my voice is about to give out. Are there any questions about what we went over tonight? I just want to emphasize this idea of this cycle. Israel sins, Israel is punished, Israel repents, and Israel is saved, and then it starts all over again. This circle of life and death as described here. And this basic theme that runs through all of the Neviim Rishoneim, the earlier prophets, of the idea that human fate is intimately tied in to your moral behavior. If you act immorally, you will suffer the consequences. If you act morally, you will then be rewarded. Now, of course, this vision of life, which is very nice and simple, well, when we come to later generations, we see that's not so simple. And we'll see that being challenged both by the book of Ecclesiastes and by the book of Job, Eov. But that's for another night. Okay, anything? Nothing? All righty, stay warm, have fun, and I'll see everybody next week, God willing.